My name is Adam Lang. I'm the head of Nesta in Scotland, and I'm really delighted today to be speaking to Katy McNeil from the Scottish Government, whom you'll have heard give a keynote in the separate element of today's presentation. And we're chatting about the Connecting Scotland initiative, which is a really, in my probably somewhat biased view, inspiring programme, a quite exciting programme that has been taking place in Scotland over the last 18 months. And whilst the context for the need for the programme is obviously a very difficult one in terms of the pandemic and the lockdown that we're all living through, I think some of the work that it's done has been hugely exciting and interesting and poses loads of questions, which I think are really interesting to grapple with for the future of how we look at public services and public service delivery in Scotland. So I'm really pleased today to be chatting to Katy McNeil about that and to be joining you all for this series of talks. So Katy, thank you very much for giving the keynote about the Connecting Scotland programme. I've got a sort of a bunch of questions, but both in terms of things that I'm already interested in about the programme and also some things from the keynote that you've given. And there are a bit of a mix of some of the practical things and hopefully some of the sort of the more, I guess, maybe strategic questions about what you think some of this might mean for the future of how we all grapple with sort of public service innovation or public service reform and improvement. Hopefully none of them are difficult questions. Hopefully they're useful questions in terms of teasing out some more stuff. The first question is a practical one from my side, and it's something that we as Nesta in Scotland and just generally working in Scotland has come up many times over the years, obviously quite a lot recently, and I'm particularly interested in it in relation to this project, and that's about, for want of a better term, the data matching element. So you mentioned in the keynote that you aim to get these devices and connections, digital connections, into 55,000 people or individuals across Scotland who were thought to be or deemed to be identified to be vulnerable or excluded or at risk. And I'm just really interested in, you alluded in the keynote, there isn't like this list of people didn't exist before in any one place, in terms of here's the list of what we need to get to. So how did, at the outset of the project, how did you go about grappling with identifying who those people were? I'd be really interested to know a bit more about that, because I know that that's just one of those long-standing challenges of all public services is data sharing, data matching, duplication, all those practical things that are difficult. So how did you grapple with that?
So I suppose the short answer is we grappled with it by not trying to do it ourselves. So our target is always that people are digitally excluded or marginalised and on a low income. The tendency often in public policy terms would be then to seek to define low income. And that could have been done, for example, to say it's people who are eligible for a specific social security benefit, or that you seek evidence that people's household income is less than a certain amount. I think what was clear, obviously, with the context of the pandemic was it's administratively burdensome. It's also intrusive, and it also would have taken a lot of time. Yeah. And so that's why we felt that we're going to have to work very locally, especially in the context of a pandemic. And so therefore, that idea that we distribute devices with an allocation, a proportion that we think goes to each local authority area on the basis of already established distribution formulas you use at a local level in Scotland, but that within each of those local areas, you're going to have different partners, you're going to have different voluntary organizations, different networks that are already existing. And so why not use those? And that mix of, I think in the first round, it was about 2/3 third sector, 1/3 public services who are identifying the customers. So the only point at which we know who the customer is after they've received their device.
Okay. That's really interesting, because that is, I imagine, quite a different approach to the majority of sort of centrally driven initiatives of this nature, and certainly of this scale, I would imagine. And I'm interested to know how, as the Scottish Government lead on this, what was the willingness to embrace that? What was it, a willingness that was born out of a necessity to get this done with pace and speed, or did you start off with different expectations and then have to revise them in some way, or were you just keen to get them out quickly to try and make a difference?
I suspect that the need for speed probably cut through what would have been seen as you'd have to have some other form of proof coming in. The things which we were heartened by was to learn from other schemes, so smaller scale digital inclusion programs, that actually the kind of rate of people receiving a device and then looking to sell it or something like that is actually very low. So and again, I think because we were able to work collaboratively with local government, we couldn't have done it this way without that layer of, we have 32 assessment panels, we have 32 local government links, and they, that helps. That's a bit of that filter around which are these services, are they reaching the right sort of people?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the other things you mentioned, and is I know very much at the heart of the project, is obviously this element of collaboration and this recognition that government alone can't do this. And one of the things I've always found really interesting in conversations with colleagues in the Scottish Government, and just generally those people looking at sort of public service innovation, is this I don't know what the right word is, but sort of requirement almost, or desire for government, local and national government, to be more humble in terms of acknowledging that not everything, because I think that sometimes there's this default that people, and I mean perhaps sometimes people like me, but in the public generally, is this idea of, well, government must be able to do that, government has to do that, or that's a government initiative, government needs to get it done, or the local council needs to get it done. But something like this absolutely required collaboration, as you were saying. And I'm just interested in sort of two elements of that in particular. One is that sort of mindset element about, I'd be interested just to know more about what any of the thinking was at the start of this about the approach, in terms of what approach did you need to put in place to build the collaboration. And the second element I'm interested in, sorry for just throwing loads of questions, is particularly in terms of bringing in the private sector, because you mentioned in the keynote how important some of the private sector has been in making this a success of this. And I'm just interested, were there challenges around that? Were there barriers? Was there a reluctance, or were they really keen to get involved? So sorry for throwing two different things at you at once.
So I think on the thing about the approach there, I don't think that anyone looking from outside in, would probably say that the office of a chief designer would be where you would cite the biggest attempt to tackle digital exclusion. However, actually, that's kind of why that probably informs its approach. So it is very much being in the office of chief designer with Kat Macaulay as one of the people who gets things moving to start with. It's absolutely about, well, what's the user need rather than what's our organizational need. And if we thought about the user need, and also then how could you meet those user needs, it kind of then becomes clear that you have to flip it around. And so therefore I think that then explains why you've got this really odd situation where you have what is really now a large capital delivery program sitting in Office of Design. But then it's also, I suppose, that has also informed our. Now, my background isn't service design or user research. I started as a policy person who moved into program management and improvement. But actually, what I was really interested in, which matches with being in Office of Chief Designer as well, is, how can we be doing this so that we're learning each time we go. So we talk about, when we're talking about how we're evaluating it, we've got the things like, how is the service working? How can we improve it? What's the impact of what we're delivering on people? And then trying to extrapolate outwards. Then therefore, what do we think would be happening in society? And then what's happened in organizations because of this? So I think all of that, it kind of makes sense in the way that it also feels like it doesn't make sense, the Office of the Chief Designer and the programme. You also asked about the involvement of the private sector there. And that of course, my immediate job before that was with CivTech Scotland, and so we're used to working with a lot of smaller, emergent, very innovative Scottish companies. Those who mostly kind of got behind and volunteered work with Connecting Scotland were often some of our sort of larger players there. What was absolutely fascinating was that they were all willing to get involved, and they all offered like slightly different things. So we had different relations. We did contract that we were having a pro bono relationship. But and the support offered varied. So, for example, we had, some free licenses from Microsoft to help build a CRM, through to some project or program management support, or commercial expertise. So that was really great because it kind of helped crystallize a number of work streams, and get us in the place of having some program management structure. Actually, I think all of our private sector support has continued because they're supporters. But by the time I think we got to July, we were pretty much running as it's SCVO and Scottish Government now. But again, I don't know how much we were probably able to make rapid progress because through the middle of April and May and June, that we'd had some other people around to help us get some structures in place. Yeah,
great. And you sort of, when you were talking there, it sort of struck me that another element of this that I'm interested in the sort of more strategic sense is partly sort of what are the success metrics that you're looking at now. I appreciate, given the nature of the program and the speed, they might not be traditional kind of big initiative success metrics, but obviously there's the element of getting the devices into the hands of the people. I totally recognise and accept that. But I'm just interested to know, are there other things that you're looking at in terms of what will make, how you will assess if this project has been a success? Because it is a big initiative. It's got as all sort of public services do, it's got a cost to it. And I'm just interested to know how you're looking at that, and what this opportunity has allowed to sort of look at in terms of maybe non-traditional success metrics beyond just the easy things to count, but the sort of the longer term things that an initiative of this nature could deliver and could derive benefit from.
Yeah, so I think we have, given the pace at which we've had to work, I'm also absolutely delighted at how much I think we've put in of the foundations of being able to measure and articulate that. So we now have a baseline survey, so almost like an entry point into Connecting Scotland, which is done when people, when soon after they receive their device, and it can be administered either by the digital champion, the person who's supporting someone and helping them set up the device, or for those who already have some digital skills, now for this phase 2, which is targeted at families with children and young care leavers, people can just go on and do that themselves. That baseline will then allow us to understand what people's level of digital engagement skills were, confidence were before. We're also in that including sort of questions around, I suppose it's kind of well-being and social isolation with the formation of this being in the pandemic. One of the key benefits that we saw as coming through was actually just that people can connect and talk to their friends and family. So we have questions about that in the baseline survey. We've just completed almost 40 in-depth user research interviews with customers from phase 1, and actually, particularly for those, because that was targeted much more on the clinical end of vulnerabilities there, what comes through really, really clearly is that even where people are still building their digital skills they're not yet feeling that they're there in terms of doing maybe like banking or a shopping or more complicated transactions. Almost all of them talk about the impact on well-being, mental health, tackling isolation. As we go through, what I'm hoping, what our hypothesis would be when we baseline the folk, families with children, that we'll see different sets of challenges, different levels of digital skills, but then we'll start to do the follow-up surveys, which tell us what's happening next. We've got some economic modelling. It's actually quite hard to come by at the moment. So if anyone watching knows of any really good ways of kind of modelling the impacts of things like how do you model someone like seeing their daughter for the first time in 12 months? It's, those things are a challenge. And one of the reasons for us having this talk today is that I hope that some of the people joining the calls will be able to share some learning that they have about that sort of thing.
Oh, absolutely. And I think if anyone does know the answer to that question, if they could sort of let us all know, I think you're onto a winner. I think that is it's genuinely one of the really interesting things about this programme. I remember, and then you made reference to it, I was on a call with Kat McCauley near the start where this first came up as a proposed initiative, and her passion for this was really astounding. And it wasn't the economic case, it wasn't the maybe traditional sort of government cause and effect case. It was the moral case of we cannot leave. If we're going into a lockdown, and at the time we didn't know, this was very early days in the pandemic, and lockdown was a new term for all of us. But if we were going into that, it was this sort of moral imperative that we couldn't leave thousands of people with no connection to the outside world, with no connection to their friends or family, and it was just morally wrong. And I think that does. Now, obviously, these things are subjective, and I'm not getting into all that, obviously, but I think it was really compelling. And I think as a catalyst for action, for my 2 cents as an outsider looking in, I think that moral argument is a large part of what drew in so much goodwill from across sector, private, third sector, public sector, and is a real tribute to Kat in that regard. So I'm also, so I've gone off topic. I've got loads of other questions. So I'll try and be quick. I'll try and pick out the really good ones. So I'm interested, at a time of extreme difficulty for central government, and I know that some of this you might not be able to answer, but I'm just interested in any reflections you have on it. At a time of sort of enormous uncertainty with the pandemic, with the public health response, with the range of economic initiatives that have had to sort of spring up, what was it that made Connecting Scotland, I mean, I think you touched on some of this in the keynote, but what was it within the government and the conversations within government and that gave real resonance to this initiative? That, because I can only imagine there must have been so many things in general that were on people's radar, and particularly back in the early days of the pandemic, and everything's urgent. Do you I mean, everything is somebody will view as a priority, or somebody will view as we've got to do this. And I'm just interested, what do you think, from your sort of perspective, made Connecting Scotland stand out as something that really had to be prioritised, or really had to be supported?
So I think some of it does go back to what you described about how CAT brought people in, was that moral imperative about it's just not going to be right. I think once we'd gone through a bit of the process and realised that we could do it, it then became less of a why should we do it into how can we do more of this, and where should we target it. I think in a sense it's probably really shifted the narrative there from stuff about digital inclusion being quite small and niche to people who are running public services which have had to go online, then suddenly realizing, oh my goodness, some of the citizens who we most need to serve have no way of accessing our service now. So it kind of, it then just crystallizes it. So it really, oh gosh, it is my business, even though I'm running a service which I thought was a person-to-person service.
And sort of building on that, and as we've discussed before, and I know you're aware that at Nesta in Wales and Scotland, we're looking at the issue of data poverty, which we sort of take to be not data about poverty, but the issue of people who can't afford the data that they need, particularly in the context of pandemic, to as you've said, to connect socially, to do their schoolwork, to access public services, or even to work and fulfill their jobs if they've moved to home working or whatever that might be for them. And I'm just interested in relation to Connecting Scotland. Obviously, a huge part of it absolutely is about the physical devices, getting them into people's hands. But as we all know, when we're talking about digital exclusion, that is only part of it. It's a very, very important part of it. But how have you grappled, or have you grappled, or has it come on your radar, this issue of data poverty? You might maybe not call it that, it might be called something different, but this issue of affordability of data. Mm-hmm. And do people have enough?
Do people have enough? So I suppose this is a quick one of our key learnings to start with, is how much data is enough data for people. Mm-hmm. So our early pilots, with funding constrained, and actually our main rollout had a constrained amount of data. So that then changes people's behaviour. So we've heard in our feedback, but what we've had a really outstanding partnership with Vodafone as our main supplier here. So Vodafone, we now have a Connecting Scotland tariff which allows us to get genuinely unlimited data packages. And so that means that if a device and a Connecting Scotland MiFi unit is going into a house where someone else maybe has a smartphone that's got limited data, they can be connecting to that MiFi dongle. I think we're going to see a change in some of the conversations. Obviously, bits of this picture are reserved to the UK government, so we can't answer all of the questions there. But I think it's absolutely shown that people not having enough data, it is a real issue. It does change people's behaviour online. And therefore, we made the decision from phase 2 onwards, and for our phase 1 customers, they'll move on to an unlimited a package as well, just because it's better.
So I know we're approaching the end of our time, so I'm just going to ask you one last question, if I may, and it's probably a bit more personal, I suppose. What have you enjoyed the most about this programme, about being at the heart of this project? And I know I don't mean to be flippant in terms of saying enjoy, because I know it's a vital thing that you're doing, and I know that the context for in which it's happening is not something that that is enjoyable for anybody. But I'm just as a public service professional, and you mentioned you've worked in a range of different elements within government. I'm interested to know, what have you got real sort of enjoyment or gratification from in this project, and how's that been different from other things that you might have worked on in the past?
So the best thing that I do every day that I'm at work just now is we have a Slack channel shared with SCVO, which is called Connecting Scotland Stories. And so every morning or any time of the day, if I'm just feeling like there's too many things to do, or oh my goodness, I've got a request for briefing on that, we've been collecting all the stories that have come in, from whether it's people tweeting, whether it's just snippets of emails from those public service organisations that we deal with, bits of video. The best thing ever is seeing photos of people using their devices. So I have about 3 or 4 absolute favourite pictures, and now Rebecca and the #1 befriending agency video is my favourite thing. So it's really unique, I think, as a public servant to actually see the faces of the people that your service is reaching at such a moment that you can see a positive impact. Mm-hmm. So there's something. And it's whenever you get deep into a spreadsheet trying to wrangle the money, is just can go and have a good look at the stories and a look at those pictures.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm obviously completely biased, but I think Connecting Scotland's a truly fantastic initiative. I think it's a phenomenal example of collaboration between national government, local government, the third sector, private sector in Scotland, working to a shared aim. Thank you very much for taking the time to chat about it today, and for answering the questions, and look forward to seeing where the Connecting Scotland initiative goes in the months, weeks, years ahead. So Katy, thank you very much.
Thanks, Adam.